It's Halloween time, and that means, depending on your age, either euphoric joy from all the candy or soul-crushing dread from all the horror. And if you're like us and have the sadistic urge to scare the absolute life out of yourself, then you're gonna need some games to do it. Which brings us to the Dark Pictures Anthology, a 4-part series of short, story and character-driven horror games. Just in time for the holiday, its third entry, House of Ashes, has just been unleashed on the public. But as you contemplate using some of that valuable candy budget to get yourself a shiny new game, I bet you're asking yourself whether this game is for you. Well, thankfully here at Creators Frolicking in Candy, we're prepared to tackle that. So today, we ask the question, who is House of Ashes really for?
Yeah, take it away, Ernie. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
House of Ashes is a visual storytelling game set in Iraq, sometime after 9/11 during the war. It follows the story of soldiers from America as they experience some interesting events and end up running for their lives like children towards the guy on the corner of the street, giving out full-size candy bars. When the soldiers fall into an ancient temple and hope excuses itself to the bathroom, it is you who makes the decision and determines who lives and who dies.
So now you know what you'll be doing, and if all you wanted to know was what the game is about and whether it's for you, we got you covered. So who is this game really for? And bear in mind, by the way, this isn't a list of requirements to like this game. This is a checklist. Hit any one of these bullet points and you'll probably like this game.
Horror game fans will appreciate the ambiance and jump scares, and the emphasis on characters and exploration will endear itself to fans of story-driven games. Fantasy, sci-fi, and thriller fans will appreciate the more fantastical elements of the game, while shared story mode will make it a must-play for people who enjoy co-op, either in person or across the globe. People who love to dive into the world of their games will find tons of meat to stick their teeth into. And fans of Until Dawn will appreciate a story similar in feel, but much better in execution.
So if that's all you wanted to know, then it's been our pleasure serving you. But stick around, because we'll break down each of these elements in depth so you can really understand why this game might or might not be for you.
So I want to start out by talking about the visual storytelling elements, like walking around, interacting with objects, and exploring. I think that these are really good for people who enjoy that style of visual storytelling, where you can kind of just experience the game as you go through.
One of this game's biggest strengths, I felt, was making those things hard to discover. So you really feel that sense of accomplishment when you find that slip of paper or that picture that's going to give you an insight into who might die in what gruesome way. There's a lot of reward to finding those things as opposed to the game just shoving them right in your face.
Oh, I completely agree with that. Especially, I remember there were a couple times when we were playing it that you see a secret and you get that notification, you're just like, oh, I want to learn more about this. And then you can like go into the menu and explore, and it's awesome.
Exactly right. And everything you find, you feel like you're building that world a little bit more, and we'll get back to that a little later on when we talk about the story. But if you're not into just walking around and you want a little bit more teeth on your game, of course the QTEs are going to be for you, the quick time events. Now these get such a bad rep in almost every game that you play, but I feel like the QTEs in this game are beautifully used.
Especially because I feel like they're a little bit harder than they are in some of the other games, which could be a detriment to some people, but I think it was masterfully done because it gives you that element of suspense where you don't want to put down your controller, you don't want to miss a QTE.
Yeah, exactly, and I think in other games, you can start to get the feeling that QTEs are just there so that you don't fall asleep during a cutscene or something like that. But in this game, what they really serve to do, I think, is channel everything that you've been doing up until that point. So it does a good job of saying, you know, you've gone through all of these interactions with these characters, you've had these conversations, you've made dialogue choices, you've made action choices, and now we're distilling that down into this one event. And it adds to, like you said, the tension, because you never know when that's coming. And that one event, if you fail it, is the difference between life and death in a lot of cases, and we absolutely experience that ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's awesome that the QTEs are very meaningful. And just like the split-second decisions where you have to choose, like, which way do I go? What decision do I make? What dialogue choice do I choose? They are very meaningful, and they give a lot of gravity to the experience. And I think that that's awesome. If you like that gravity, if you like that thing where your choices matter and the things you do actually define the characters, then this game is for you.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, without giving any spoilers, there was a time where that one split-second decision was the difference between life or death for a character. They don't come around that often, where you get into that screen where it says, oh, you have to pick this or this. When that does happen, you absolutely feel the tension, the gravity, like you said, of that moment, because that is a life or death situation, and you can't overuse it, and this game certainly does not.
Yeah, and I want to take that as a segue into the characters of this game. The characters of this game are really well done. I think that they have strong personalities that you can get to either love or hate, which I love in games where the characters just aren't cookie cutters. In some ways they are, but in most of the ways, they have actual defined personalities, which I loved.
Yeah, there's definitely a few points of this where you feel like, oh, this is a character trope that I've seen before, or you can kind of see the way that characters move. But look, no writer bats 1,000. By and large, these are characters that you feel like you can really get to know, and that's so important. We said that this game is for people who love to be able to delve into their worlds, who love this story-driven style of game where gameplay is secondary to the story that you're experiencing. And as we all know, when you're experiencing a story, the characters, the vehicle through which you experience that, it's the most important thing. And in this game, even though there's a few times where you feel like the characters are, less than realistic, it's far outweighed by the number of times that the characters pull out a detail from their backstory or, have a different interaction with a certain character that just pulls you really into the experience and immerses you, and that's so important in a game like this.
Speaking of interactions, though, this might be for me, but I get a little rush of dopamine every time I feel like I chose the correct dialogue option, and you see across the top of the screen, like, yes, my resourcefulness went up, or like, yes, my likability went up, and it just gives you this secondary feedback that for some people I'm sure is very validating, or it can be awesome and maybe even used as a drinking game, like, damn, you lowered our relationship, take a shot.
You know what? I like that idea. We might actually have to do that at some point. But you're right, seeing that visual feedback, it's really cool. And again, it's another example of this game using something that we've seen done in previous titles, but doing it well enough that you don't feel like it's intrusive, and at the same time you do feel like it's meaningful. It's a fine line to walk, but in so many instances this game really does it well, and it goes to something that you said before about people who like Until Dawn. We said that if you like that game, you are going to love this game, and it's because it takes some of the groundwork that we saw Supermassive use in Until Dawn. That idea that you can see how the characters play off against each other and how the relationships develop. And it takes it to another level here. You get fewer playable characters, but the ones that you do get, you get much more of a real-time change in the way they react to each other, the way that they interact with each other, based on the decisions that you yourself made. And I really like the systems like that feel like they're happening in the background, that have real effect on what you're actually seeing.
And to clarify that for people who have played Until Dawn and really like it, I feel like what this game does over Until Dawn is it takes the systems that are there and kind of tweaks them to be better in almost every single way. They'll still feel very familiar, but they'll just feel more streamlined, as you said, more in the background, and just they did it really, really well.
It is definitely the best instance of that. It does not feel like they're just copying and pasting. It feels like real iteration, real improvement. Speaking of which, the story is one of the things that I feel like can sometimes fall flat, especially in horror games. If you've talked to me at all, you know that horror is not a genre that I personally like a lot of the times, because I do feel like story can fall behind, and it can fall victim to just shock value or jump scares or things like that. But thankfully this time around, this story did not succumb to any of that. I was really gripped by the mystery of the story. And at the same time, you're experiencing all the mystery of what's happening, who are these monsters, what's chasing us. At the same time, there's a real story about the war in Iraq, and they deal with that throughout the game with the different characters and again, the way that they change. So to have the juxtaposition of a real story that, you know, a lot of you probably did live through. I mean, you and I, Kagi, were both alive at the time that the Iraq war was happening. So you're living through that story at the same time that you're dealing with this fantastical story of horror and monsters and things like that.
I like that you point that out, because there is that relatability from your own experiences that this game kind of perverts in some ways. It plays into your expectations as well as tries to subvert them in ways, which I think is really good. As you mentioned, a lot of horror games basically try to coast along on their suspense, on their horror, on their jump scares. And this game doesn't need to. That horror and those jump scares are there and done well, but there's also, as you said, this amazing story that has tons of world building where you find secrets, you experience more of the world, you start to put together the clues that you are given, and you can piece together. But as well, if you want to just speedrun through this game, you can do that too. You don't have to look for the other elements that basically give you more about what's actually going on.
That's right. Now, you said the key word there, world building. When we say that if you're a fan of sci-fi, fantasy, thrillers, this is a game for you, anyone who is a fan of those genres, and God knows you and I both are in a big way, world building is such an essential piece of that, because it doesn't matter the characters that you have. It doesn't matter if you have the greatest story ever. If you can't put me in a world that I feel like I'm getting to understand, that I'm intrigued by, none of that really matters. But in this case, the world that they present is believable, which is a huge thing in a horror game, because again, that really it ramps up the tension, because you feel like, oh, this could actually be happening to me. And I think this game really did a good job with that. But not only is it believable, but it's interesting. It develops the more you experience it, and you start to peel back those layers as the game happens, to the point where as you start to get down to the bedrock, what is this, what are we really experiencing, what is really going on here, as you get further and further on throughout the game, you start to feel that very familiar drive forward that when you think about your favorite games, in my case it's Knights of the Old Republic, or it's Spider-Man, or Horizon Zero Dawn, you feel that urge to keep going and just figure out what is next, what is that next layer that I can peel back. And this game really delivers that to you in a very compact package.
And speaking of the compact package, I want to talk about whether this game is even worth it.
Yeah,
so
good point.
Our playthrough basically took like 6 hours, give or take, which honestly isn't the longest game in the world for 30 hours, but it has tons of replayability. One of the main ways that we played the game was through this mode called Shared Story. Basically, it's co-op where you play with one friend through the internet. There's other co-op modes that are like local co-op, but Shared Story right now is amazing. You can basically play the game twice, since as I said, you play with one other friend, and you basically get to control half of the cast, and you have completely different experiences than the person that you're playing with, which basically gives you an additional playthrough if you want to play through with the same friend, just on the other side, which immediately just doubles the length of the game. On
that topic of replayability as well, one of the real strengths of this game is that it doesn't map out for you exactly where you went wrong. You know, if a character died, you know, what exactly did you do to make that happen? It does not map that out. So it gives you a lot of mystery about how do I go back and make my decisions a little differently so that character lives. If any of you have played Detroit Become Human, it's another similarly character-driven, decision-driven game. In that title, you can go back and look at a decision map and see exactly what happens at every point and where you might have gone wrong. It's cool if you don't feel like replaying the entire game, but as we've said, this game, first of all, is short enough that you can replay it in one sitting, especially if you're with a friend. And it's good enough that you actually want to do that and figure out, okay, where can I do things differently? Can I actually save all of my playable characters? Can I kill all of my playable characters? All of that is there.
Absolutely. Another cool thing about the game that I'd like to point out is that you can definitely achievement hunt this game. There are some really interesting ones, like doing your best to keep certain characters that you don't think you can save alive, or trying to kill other characters like that. And it's, as you said, you have to figure out the decision tree to how to do these things. Like, you could Google it, but if you're trying to achievement hunt, you might not if you want to experience this. And I think it's cool that this game does have that additional way to play it.
Yeah, it's so important with games like this that you feel like each experience you have can be different. And again, the fact that you can't see all of the decisions that you could have made differently and what exactly they would have lined up with makes it so that you actually want to replay the game, because you can get different endings, you can save different characters. Characters can get killed in wildly different ways if you're into that. And, you know, it's Halloween, so you probably are. You know, I mean, it's one of those things that,
I guess we know what Griffin's into, guys.
Well, I didn't say I was into that. If you remember, if you watched the stream, I was the one trying to save a lot of characters. But, you know, whatever. We could talk about that later. The point is, the replay value of this game is not necessarily in the greatness of its gameplay or anything like that. The same way that you'd replay, you know, in my case, I've replayed Spider-Man, I've replayed God of War. The draw of replayability is not necessarily in those gameplay elements, but it's in experiencing the story in a completely different way than you experienced it the first time. Whether you're playing with someone else or playing on your own, you actually get to experience the story completely differently.
And so, just to wrap up, I think it might have come across during our discussions, but we loved the game. We enjoyed playing it on stream. Cough, check out our Twitches in the description, and are definitely going to play it again to try to get more out of it. This is the best game that Supermassive has ever made, in our opinion, passing Until Dawn by a considerable margin. It is a dramatic step up from the rest of the Dark Pictures Anthology, and honestly, I can't wait to play the next one when it comes out.
To paraphrase the great Jerry Springer, and now it's time for my final question. Who is this game not for? Honestly, basically no one. This is the pinnacle of this style of game up to this point. Yes, it's for all the fans that we were talking about earlier, but if you consider yourself a fan of video games in general, you owe it to yourself to play this game. Most of us here would consider ourselves passionate video game fans, and if you do, this game is at least worth a try.
House of Ashes was definitely for us.